Washington sources are here tonight, including Democratic Congressman Khanna of California and Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton. And Shermichael, when this Supreme Court decision came out, the White House came out, they said it was a huge win. President Trump came to the briefing room, did something he doesn't normally do. But the question is now, is this going to be the new workaround? Are judges just we're going to have legal groups that just say, well, this is a class action lawsuit, and that's the way they get a nationwide stop on the executive orders and alike?
I think they'll try, but even as this judge said, you still have the opportunity for the executive to go through the appellate process, and ultimately I believe they probably want to go all the way back to the Supreme Court to get a final ruling on this. I do suspect that there's an interesting framing and argument that the executive branch will make if they go back to the Supreme Court to be the final arbiter on this issue. They'll say, look, the 14th Amendment, 1868, specifically pertained to slaves, the only group that was brought into the country via compulsory force, no choice of their own. And when you talk about born and naturalized, I think they'll argue naturalized being foreign, that was the slaves who were brought here, and born being their descendants. How do you make that correlation to immigrants who came into the country in violation of our immigration laws? Now, some on the other side may argue, well, what about the Wong case and Japanese or Asians who were brought here against their will? And I think what the court would argue at that time, the executive will argue at the time, will be likely jurisdiction matters here. And does the executive branch have the right to make a case that citizenship shouldn't just be granted carte blanche based off of jurisprudence and the history surrounding the 14th Amendment as it pertained to Dred Scott v. Sanford? I think it's a very interesting argument to make.
But I also think the vehicle here is what's new territory here in terms of being a class action lawsuit versus a nationwide injunction, because the White House had touted the Supreme Court's ruling, which left open this possibility. Today they said, though, that the decision here by this judge, again, a Bush appointee, disregards the rule of law by abusing class action certification procedures, and that they're going to fight this vigorously.
Well, I think we need to understand what the fundamental issue is. They're trying to reverse the Constitution that says if you're born in the United States, you're an American citizen. I can't believe we're even having this conversation in 2025. I think 90% of this country, or 80% of this country, believes that if you were born in the United States, you should be an American citizen. And when they rule on the substance, I am 100% almost that the Supreme Court is going to find it cockamamie that they're trying to deprive people born in America of citizenship.
I don't know, Congressman, because I think the argument that the attorneys for the president will argue, if you are a legal resident of the country, meaning you're an immigrant who came here legally through the proper process, then of course your children should absolutely be given a Social Security, a U.S. passport. They should be U.S. citizens. We would all agree with that. But I do think there is a legitimate argument to make if you came into the country in violation of our immigration laws, should your children automatically be granted citizenship? And I'm not necessarily sure.
The Constitution is pretty clear. The 14th Amendment says if you're born in the United States, you have citizenship. And I think most Americans believe that. But it goes to what J.D. Vance and what they want to do is they want to change the fundamental definition of America. I mean, J.D. Vance gave this speech. He said to be American is not to believe in the Constitution or Declaration of Independence. To be an American depends on how many generations you go back and how much your family fought for this country. That's not the America of Lincoln or Frederick Douglass. I believe that most Americans view this country as if you're born here, you're a citizen, and if you believe in the Constitution and Declaration, that's what makes you American.
But see, I would imagine they would say then, what about Elk versus Wilk in 1886, where the Supreme Court said that the 14th Amendment didn't apply to Native Americans because they were born on sovereign tribes, so they didn't fully belong under U.S. jurisprudence. The administration would say, well, we could see how that framing would apply to illegal immigrants coming into the country. So to having citizenship elsewhere, having renounced that citizenship, again, should their children therefore be given U.S. citizenship merely by being born here?
I don't think we want to go to a 19th century precedent.
But I'm just saying, I would imagine, but my point is, I would imagine if they're trying to make the argument that the 14th Amendment explicitly pertained to slaves and their descendants and not everyone else, I think there are some historical points that they could make to point to say there's a logical framing of that.
Just the basic question. Do you think someone born in the United States should be a citizen?
Of course. If you're here legally, of course.
What if someone's undocumented, they have a baby here, You don't think that person should be a citizen?
I think there should be a recourse for people who come into the country against our immigration laws to find legality to become a citizen. And then, sure, there should be a process for their children to be granted a citizenship, but it's just carte blanche. We used to call them anchor babies years ago. Should that be an appropriate recourse? I don't know if I would agree with that.
Well, we will see what the courts decide here. Obviously, they are going to appeal this. Congressman Shermichael, it's great to have you both here.